Hi there, I'm Lou,
And I'm Lee.
and this is Uncovering History. Hello everyone, we are back for part 2 of Ted Bundy. So, hope you listened to the last one. Today we're going to wrap it up with Lee taking us through the rest of his story.
Hi everyone, so welcome to episode 7. As Lucia said, this is Ted Bundy part 2, so we'll continue off from where we left off in the first part, which was where Ted Bundy is first arrested.
Can you just give us a quick rundown of what we visited last time?
Yeah, of course. So we began by looking at Ted Bundy's early life, moving through childhood into his teenage years and to where he studied at the University of Washington. We then moved on to where he started to show interest in the political side of the world and where he then began studying law at the University of Utah. And then unfortunately it transpired where we delved into the darker side of his life where he began to abduct and murder women.
It's fair to say that that first episode on Ted Bundy was pretty gruesome. And like Lee said before, this is in no way trying to glorify the murders or his actions. It's really just to uncover the truth and look at why he did what he did. So, without further ado, Lee, let's carry on.
Okay, so we'll continue from where we stopped in the last episode, which was the update that Bundy had been arrested in Utah. Now, this arrest occurred on August the 16th, 1975, when Bundy was arrested by a Utah Highway Patrol officer, Bob Haywood, in Granger, which was a Salt Lake City suburb. He was stopped due to his odd choice of driving style at such a time of night, which involved cruising residential areas. Bundy also attempted to flee at high speeds after seeing the patrol car. Now, upon Bundy's stopping, or being stopped, the officer noticed that the front passenger seat had been removed, and this resulted in the car being searched immediately. Officer Bob Haywood found ski masks, a crowbar, handcuffs, rubbish bags, a coil of rope, an ice pick, and other items which would typically be associated with robberies. Bundy attempted to reason with the officer that they were all usual items and could be easily seen within a home. This did not fly, and he was subsequently arrested.
I mean, I think if the officer hadn't have arrested him based on what was in his car and how, the state of his car as well, with that passenger seat being removed, I mean, thank goodness that he did.
Yeah, no, it'd be a very odd car to pull over, so it would definitely warrant further investigation. So, during this time, they searched Bundy's apartment, where they found items that highlighted the Wildwood Inn and the Viewmont High School. However, due to a lack of material evidence, he was released. Bundy claimed in later interviews that the search missed a set of Polaroids, which he destroyed upon returning home.
Imagine being the officers that searched his house and not finding that specific item. You would think that you've missed a huge opportunity to stop him.
Well, it's as well as that, it was a lot of the officers that were involved in the overall apprehension of Ted Bundy stated that they'd never seen a murder before, let alone a serial killer in the nature that he sort of dealt with everything around him.
I suppose that, if these crimes weren't usual, then typically they might not have been equipped enough to be able to, look for specific things or put two and two together or, all of that sort of stuff that officers are now kind of used to, unfortunately, because murder is so common. But yeah, what a thing not to find.
Yeah, I know, exactly. So, moving on to irregular occurrences with Elizabeth. Now, Bundy, as of this, was put on 24-hour surveillance, and Elizabeth, whom had already discussed issues with the police, was interviewed again. She noted that she had found unusual items in Bundy's apartment the year prior, such as crutches, a bag of plaster, and a meat cleaver which had never been used for cooking, surgical gloves, and a sack full of women's clothing. Bundy was not affluent, and did not have disposable money to hand, and as such it is believed that most of, if not all of the items were stolen. And when Elizabeth had previously confronted Bundy about a TV, he responded with, "If you tell anyone, I'll break your fucking neck."
Jesus.
Yeah, so once again, you're seeing even the people that are close to him, they're not immune to his anger, and it's just pure rage that harbours inside him.
I guess you can't hide it forever.
Exactly. So along with this, Bundy also became erratic and aggressive when she suggested cutting her hair. Elizabeth's hair at the time was long and parted in the middle, not dissimilar to his first girlfriend, Stephanie Brooks.
So it all comes back to Stephanie Brooks, that poor, poor woman.
Yeah.
His resentment for her has just obviously kind of spiraled out of control.
Yeah, it's definitely a part of him that's fueling his anger. And in a more sinister turn of events, she was also woken up on several occasions to find him under the covers with a flashlight examining her body.
I'm sorry, what?
Yeah, so she reported that she'd wake up to find him examining her body under the covers in silence with a flashlight.
There is no words. That is so creepy.
It's very creepy.
I mean, if that doesn't give you an excuse to get the hell out of there, then I don't know what would.
Well, I think it's this. She's reflected on everything, and that's why she felt it was her duty to get involved and to talk to the police to say, look, this person is dangerous.
True.
He seems very similar to what you're looking for, so it's definitely worth you checking him out.
If that was me, I would be out. I'd be off. I'd be pack your bags, off you go, quick, run.
It's not a normal thing.
I know it's not as simple as that, especially when there's feelings and emotions, but oh my goodness. Imagine waking up and someone's under the covers with a torch looking at you.
I know, it's very strange. But because she came forward with such information, the police naturally began to look into her events around that time. However, it was made abundantly clear due to alibis and just her general involvement that there was no involvement in the disappearances, and as such she was not a suspect. It was through these discussions that the detectives were also able to deduce the existence of Stephanie Brooks and her brief engagement to Bundy. So through Elizabeth's help, the police were able to build a greater picture on his history and his current being, and trying to at least begin to process his mental state.
Well, I mean, I think the fact that she whistle blew on his intenseness and, you know, the way he was so creepy, and I mean, they are all red flags that you just would not want to be around.
Yeah. And in continuation of this, in September of 1975, Bundy sold his Volkswagen Beetle, which was almost immediately impounded. The Utah police and FBI technicians searched it thoroughly, where they found matching samples of Karen Campbell, Melissa Smith, and Carol DeRonch. An FBI specialist, Robert Neal, concluded that the presence of hair strands in one car matching 3 different victims who had never met one another would be a coincidence of mind-boggling rarity. So that once again just starts bringing the picture together that he is definitely involved and he is guilty of the crimes. Although they cannot physically prove it yet by catching him, they're able to start building a picture which is very much supporting this evidence.
I mean, the fact that they, you know, immediately took the car once he had sold it and found the DNA evidence of those women, I mean, surely he'd be banged to rights just from that.
Well, unfortunately, as we've discussed in the past episode, lots of Bundy's victims were never found or were not found until when he made his final confessions. So a lot of the evidence that they've put together, unfortunately, is conjecture. It's lists based on evidence they've collated, and it's building a strategy and building an understanding, but unfortunately the concrete evidence just isn't there yet.
It's a shame, though. I mean, I do get it. We are talking about quite a while ago, and obviously the technology we have today in able to, catch killers, catch criminals, and, absolutely make sure that they go down or are sentenced for something. They just didn't have that sort of access to that technology back then.
Yeah, it was all very new. I mean, nowadays you just need nanoparticles of blood or DNA to be able to understand who someone is, but back then it was unfathomable. So yeah, they were definitely under pressure given what was available to them. But with new evidence in hand, on October the 2nd, 1975, The detectives put Bundy into a lineup where Carol DeRonch immediately identified him as the stranger that had called himself Officer Roseland. Alongside this, witnesses from the school auditorium, including the drama teacher, identified him as the stranger pacing back and forward. There was unfortunately insufficient evidence to tie him to Deborah Kent, whose body was never found. However, he was charged with aggravated kidnapping and attempted criminal assault in the Carol DeRonch case. He was bailed due to a $15,000 payment made by his parents. He subsequently spent most of his time after that living in Elizabeth's apartment, and Elizabeth was recorded saying, "When myself and Ted left the apartment, so many unmarked police cars started up that it sounded like the beginning of the Indy 500.
I mean, I'm not surprised. I'm not surprised. They clearly know that Ted has this hidden sort of, malicious side to him. And, I guess in order to try and save as many people as possible or try and catch him in the act, you would follow him.
Yeah, it's no longer about being subtle. It's just about stopping someone who is just evil.
Yeah.
So as a result of this, once again building on the information they've been able to collate, the detectives were beginning to close in, and as a sign of good faith, 3 principal investigators, Jerry Thompson from Utah, Robert Keppel from Washington, and Michael Fisher from Colorado, joined together to collate information further while continuing to build a case. This information was received from over 30 detectives and prosecutors across 5 states. And in February 1976, Bundy stood trial for the Carol DeRonch kidnapping. Bundy waived his right to a jury due to the negativity surrounding the case, and after 4 days and a weekend of deliberation, Bundy was found guilty of kidnapping and assault. In June, he was sentenced to 1 to 15 years in prison in the Utah State Prison.
1 to 15 years?
It was very odd, yeah. It was, I assume, taking things into consideration like good behaviour and how maybe other evidence coming to light. But it's a very ambiguous amount of time for someone to serve in prison. So in October, shortly after beginning his sentence, Bundy was found in a section of bushes in the prison yard carrying what can only be described as a makeshift escape kit. This included items such as road maps, airline schedules, and a social security card.
How did he get road maps and an airline schedule?
I think bartering, maybe. Inside the prison system, trading with other inmates, maybe bribing guards.
I mean, surely,
Who knows?
If someone's asking for road maps, it's pretty obvious what they're planning to do.
True, but it's a commodity, so if Bundy's willing to provide something that the other person wants, then they'll look the other way, and that could be in the form of anything. So as punishment, he was confined to solitary living, and later that month, Colorado authorities also charged him with Karen Campbell's murder, of which Bundy waived extradition proceedings and was soon transferred to Aspen in January 1977. And now we move on to the part of the story which includes his infamous escapes, which I still find insane to think about today. So, on June the 7th, 1977, Bundy was transported to the Pitkin County Courthouse in Aspen for his preliminary hearing. Strangely, Bundy had elected to stand as his own attorney during this process, and as a result, his handcuffs and leg shackles were removed at the order of the judge. During a recess, he was allowed to enter the library to conduct additional research pertaining to his case. Unattended, I might add.
Oh, well, hang on a minute.
So he was being watched, but the library contained bookcases where he was able to no longer be seen.
But the fact is that he's clearly thought about this. Don't get a representative so he can represent himself. Therefore, chances are, judge might, allow him to be unshackled, as it were. Then he's given some time in a library by himself or, with a space to not be watched or looked at. I mean, come on.
Yeah, he definitely understands the judicial system. And through placements of bookcases and unfortunate windows, Bundy was able to open the second floor window and jump to the ground floor. He injured his right ankle upon landing. And now, after shedding immediate outer clothing, he walked through Aspen as roadblocks and police began to frantically search for the recently escaped Bundy. He made his way southward onto Aspen Mountain. Near its summit, Bundy broke into a cabin, stealing food, clothing, and a rifle. He remained in the cabin overnight before continuing on the next morning, with the goal of continuing the next morning, heading into town to Crested Butte. But during his travels, he became lost in the vast and dense forests. Bundy later noted in a confession that he traversed the forest for 2 days before breaking into another camping trailer, stealing more food, a parka coat, and other supplies. Now, 3 days later, after still being successful in evading authorities, he stole a car parked closely to Aspen Golf Course. While driving into Aspen, the continuous ankle pain alongside sleep deprivation led 2 officers to pull him over, and as a result of his reckless driving, which consisted of weaving from side to side. Now, at this point, Bundy had been a fugitive for 6 days, and inside the car was once again maps of the mountain area around Aspen that prosecutors were using, in his case, to showcase the location of Karen Campbell's body. This showed premeditation for the escape.
Oh my goodness, imagine 6 days. I mean, so many things, so many different reasons why this shouldn't have happened.
In a very strange place as well, full of harsh conditions, and it would be incredibly difficult to track someone in the mountains.
I guess that's why he was so successful for those 6 days.
Exactly, like he knew what he needed to do and how to buy
survive.
himself some time, yeah. So, back under arrest. Bundy was immediately rearrested, where he continued to waive his right to a defense attorney or any form of aid that would help him fight his case.
Why do you think that is?
Arrogance and confidence. And also because he'd been studying law, he believed that he was a self-proclaimed lawyer, so he didn't need any help. Plus, I think he hoped that he'd get some of the rewards and luxuries, such as not having to wear chains or being treated more as someone of power and importance because he was a lawyer.
Yeah.
Even if it was defending himself.
It kind of all creates this idea that, Bundy was only really interested in, like you said, power, respect, and people to see that he was a smart person.
Yeah, he wanted to be affluent, he wanted to be part of the elite, and he wanted to be respected. However, while this continued, Bundy was already setting together a new plan, which would be a plan for his next escape. Through means unknown, and in his eyes trading, he acquired a detailed floor plan of the jail and was able to accumulate $500 that was smuggled in through various means over the course of 6 months. He later testified during an interview that Carol Ann Boone, a previous work colleague and girlfriend, was responsible. Bundy was psychotic, but he was patient, and during the evenings when inmates would shower, he would carefully and slowly work on sawing a hole between the steel reinforcing bars in the ceiling of the cell, and as a result of inside life and choices to make escape easier, he had lost almost 16 kilograms, or roughly 2.5 stone, allowing him to wiggle through the gap that he had created. And in the weeks that followed, as to not alert suspicion, Bundy executed a number of practice runs successfully to prepare himself for the real escape. Now, reports were made about movement in the ceiling, but these were sadly never investigated.
Wow, okay. So, not only has anyone picked up on the fact that he has lost a lot of weight, but they're also ignoring some, suspect sounds in the ceiling.
Yeah, so, the weight would have been something natural to the prison, underfed and sort of living a tumultuous life, but the sounds were reported by other inmates, and the officers just either due to being understaffed or just not taking them seriously, given that I guess prison inmates would try and get away with a lot or do anything to get some attention or some rewards.
Yeah.
They were overlooked. So going forward, on the night of December the 30th, with only a skeleton crew on shift and most non-violent prisoners at home with their families through furlough, Bundy orchestrated the escape. He first simulated an individual sleeping via items he had available in his cell, such as books. Bundy then crawled into the crawl space that he had been preparing to allow him access to break through the ceiling and into the apartment of the chief jailer, who was also not working on shift that evening. With no one in sight and no form of hindrance, Bundy was able to change into civilian clothing before walking out the front door to freedom.
I don't know what to say. It's completely orchestrated. The fact that he knew that there was only a skeleton crew, that he knew that the chief jailer was not on shift. I mean, and the fact that he just managed to walk through the door.
Well, it's like I said, he was incredibly patient, and once he'd got to the chief's room and he changed into civilian clothing, no one is ever going to suspect somebody walking out the prison looking like a prison guard who's finished his shift or someone who's meant to be there.
I guess.
So as such, he'd never arouse suspicion.
It's very clever.
Yeah, unfortunately so. So, Bundy, continuing his normal tendencies, stole a car almost immediately and began driving east, away from the jail. The car, however, was not in good shape and broke down shortly after. Bundy was able to hail a ride some 60 miles east to Vail, where he caught a bus to Denver before boarding a morning flight to Chicago. By the time the skeleton crew had realized that Bundy was missing, some 17 hours later, he had already made his way to Chicago. Now, to put that into perspective, that's a distance travelled of roughly 1,200 miles.
17 hours without knowing.
Or about 1,900 kilometres, give or take.
That just, I mean, that almost makes it impossible for them to find him, especially back in, this sort of time period. But again, wouldn't something flag when he was boarding these flights?
I honestly don't know. I think other things that he hasn't discussed, such as potentially having fake identification, and also just how airports would have been ran back then, it was a lot less scrutinised.
I guess it's more paper-based documents rather than, chips and pins and all of that sort of things in our passports that we have today.
Exactly. We're talking 45 odd years ago, yeah.
Yeah.
So by this time, Bundy's travels continued until he arrived in Florida, where he rented a hotel room under the alias of Chris Hagen, near the Florida State University, or the FSU campus. In later testimonies, Bundy stated that he initially considered finding legitimate employment while refraining from further criminal activity, knowing that he would likely remain a free and unprosecuted man, providing he did not attract the attention of the police forces situated around him. The plan, however, began to fall through when a construction job required official identification in order to continue on with the application. As a result, Bundy quickly reverted back to his old habits of shoplifting, robbery, and stealing money and credit cards left in shopping carts.
Well, I mean, this is not a clever move, really, is it? If you think about it, you start bringing yourself attention. He's, obviously doing things that are illegal to help sustain himself. I mean, surely the police would maybe put two and two together.
I know, but at this point they don't know where he is. So
it could be anyone, I guess.
It could be anyone. And also, he hasn't been caught for any of this. So this is just him going back to his habits, which first started as a teenager when he used to steal things for ski passes or ski boots.
Yeah, this is didn't have any sort of guilt.
Exactly. This is just him reverting back to what he knows how to do. And unfortunately, this then transpires to his other side also resurfacing. So, on the night of January 15th, 1978, Bundy entered the Chi Omega sorority house through a rear door of which the lock could be manipulated. At roughly 2:45 a.m., 21-year-old Margaret Bowman was attacked by Bundy with a piece of oak firewood as she slept. Bundy then garroted her with a nylon stocking.
What does garroted mean?
So it's using something like a piece of wood to put in between the knot so that you can twist it and tie it tighter.
Oh my goodness.
So it's a way of basically performing extreme strangulation.
Wow.
It's incredibly violent.
That's awful. That's so awful.
Because not only are you being strangled, but the item is also being pressed very harshly into the throat and neck area.
What an arsehole.
Mm-hmm. So Bundy then entered the bedroom of 20-year-old Lisa Levy, where he beat her unconscious, strangled her, tore one of her nipples off, bit into her buttock and sexually assaulted her. Now, I apologise for the graphic nature of this, but the details are pertinent to the case as it develops, so we will come back to this bit. In the adjoining room, he attacked 20-year-old Kathy Kleiner, breaking her jaw and deeply lacerating her shoulder. During this moment, he also attacked 21-year-old Karen Chandler, who suffered a broken jaw, loss of teeth, and a crushed finger as a result of the violent assault by Bundy. Now, both Kathy Kleiner and Karen Chandler survived, with Kathy attributing it to passing lights illuminating the bedroom, forcing Bundy to flee. During this time, he was also seen by an eyewitness, sorority sister Nita Neary, and Tallahassee detectives believe that the 4 attacks took place in under 15 minutes total.
Oh my God.
So this was
Savage.
This was him losing control, and just his desire overtook him. He was no longer collected and picking his targets carefully. This was a rampage, and it was horrific. Now, after escaping the sorority house, Bundy broke into a basement apartment 8 blocks away, attacking 21-year-old Cheryl Thomas, dislocating her shoulder, fracturing her jaw and her skull in 5 places. Cheryl Thomas survived this horrible ordeal, but was left with permanent deafness and equilibrium damage, which affected balance and her dance career.
Oh my goodness. She survived.
Yes, she survived, but with permanent damage.
5 fractures on her skull.
Yeah, so during testimonies and confessions, it was said that the blunt force trauma admitted was severe and continuous. So it takes real rage and aggression and power to be able to fracture a skull.
Let alone 5 times. And the fact that she survived, though.
Yeah, absolutely. Wow. It's incredible. And on the 8th of February, so now going forward a few weeks, Bundy approached 14-year-old Leslie Parmenter, presenting the appearance of fire department employee Richard Burton. Bundy retreated, however, when her older brother arrived and challenged him.
Good.
Exactly. And as such, Bundy fled and began his journey back to Salt Lake City. Now, only 1 day later, on February the 9th, 12-year-old Kimberly Diane Leach of Lake City Junior High School was abducted and murdered by Bundy. 7 weeks later, after an intensive search, her partially mummified remains were found in a pig farrowing shelter near River State Park. Kimberly Diane Leach had been sexually assaulted and then killed with severe neck lacerations present at the result of a sharp knife.
It's just awful. It's disgusting.
It is, and they are heinous, vicious, aggressive crimes. Now, on February the 12th, 1978, with insufficient money to continue his hidden life, he was stopped by Pensacola police officer David Lee near the Alabama state line after a wants and warrants check showed his Volkswagen Beetle was stolen. Officer Lee attempted to arrest Bundy, but this was not without a struggle. Bundy was able to get free before making off running. Officer Lee heroically made chase while firing 2 warning shots before tackling Bundy to the ground. In the stolen vehicle, 3 sets of IDs were found, belonging to female FSU students. There was also 21 stolen credit cards and a stolen TV set. Bundy was also later identified as Robert Burton, the fire department employee, through the disguise that he had used. And once again, we can already see that he's back to his old ways and he's gone back to his Volkswagen Beetle. Although it's not the same one that he had before, he's gone back to his same mantra and same design. And at this point, unaware to Officer Lee, he had just arrested one of the FBI's 10 most wanted fugitives. Bundy spoke to him stating, "I wish you had killed me."
I hope he got a promotion after that.
Well, he deserves it because it was heroic. And we all know how dangerous Bundy is, so yeah, he was pretty fearless and he did the right thing. So, Florida trials and marriage, moving forward now. We now move on to Bundy's trial in Miami due to a change in location and his unusual marriage. The trial was covered by over 250 reporters from 5 separate continents and was the first ever nationally televised trial in the United States. Bundy would once again be his own attorney, as he wanted to remain in charge, even though a pending death sentence loomed over his head.
That's so arrogant.
I know, I think he relishes in it. It's where he flourishes. And a plea bargain of a 75-year prison sentence for the murders of Margaret Bowman, Lisa Levy, and Kimberly Diane Leach was seen as a tactical move by Bundy, who later quoted that his intention was to wait a few years for evidence to become lost or disintegrate, for witnesses to die, move on, or retract their testimony. His intention was then to push for acquittal, a twisted move in all accounts.
I can't believe it. He wanted to be acquitted.
Effectively, he wanted to take the plea deal, bide his time, put together some defence, and then go for an appeal of some sort. But at the last minute, however, Bundy refused the deal. This is believed to be due to Bundy being unable to relinquish control. At the trial, crucial testimony came from Chi Omega sorority members Connie Hastings, who placed Bundy in the vicinity, and Nita Neary, who saw him leaving the sorority house clutching the oak murder weapon. Alongside this, incriminating physical evidence included impressions of the bite wounds Bundy had inflicted on Lisa Levy's left buttock, which forensic odontologists Richard Surveillon and Lowell Levine matched to castings of Bundy's teeth. This was made more evident through a chipped incisor. These pieces of evidence were crucial to the trial. And now, on the 24th of July, 1979, less than 7 hours after the jury had begun to deliberate, Bundy was found guilty for murder of Margaret Bowman and Lisa Levy, alongside 3 counts of attempted first-degree murder for the assaults on Kathy Kleiner, Karen Chandler, and Cheryl Thomas. He was also found guilty of 2 counts of burglary. The trial judge, Edward Coward, imposed death sentences for the murder convictions.
Good. I'm a little bit worried that it took nearly 7 hours for the jury to deliberate on this. But, yeah, good. Good.
Yep. So 6 months later, in a second trial in Orlando for the abduction and murder of Kimberly Diane Leach, Bundy was found guilty once again after less than 8 hours deliberation. Both physical and visual evidence was presented through eyewitness accounts and fibres, which led to his conviction. And it was during the penalty phase of the trial that Bundy took advantage of a loophole in Florida state law, permitting him to marry none other than the previous co-worker and girlfriend who had helped him smuggle in the $500 that aided his escape, Carol Ann Boot. Carol had also moved to Florida to be close to Bundy. And on the 10th of February 1980, Bundy was sentenced for a 3rd time to death by electrocution. As the sentence was announced, he reportedly stood and screamed, "Tell the jury they were wrong." This death sentence would be the ultimate and defining sentence that would be carried out 9 years later.
Why did it take 9 years?
There are people on death row today that have been there for decades. It's a slow and arduous process because of the contentiousness of it.
Okay.
Taking someone's life through means, be it injections or electrocution, it's a difficult process. So the conviction itself doesn't guarantee. So in October 1981, Boone gave birth to a daughter and named Bundy as the father. While conjugal visits were not allowed in Rayford Prison, it was common that inmates were known to pool their money in order to bribe guards to allow them intimate time along with their female visitors. Now we move on to the part of death row confessions and death. And this is the final segment. So Bundy spent many hours discussing his crimes with Stephen McCloud and Hugh Ainsworth. However, Bundy was always speaking in the third person to not attach the concept of a confession to his words, while ultimately obfuscating his guilt.
That's classic kind of diversion there.
Yeah, it's just like, if I would have done it, or if he'd have done it, this is what would have happened.
If said person would have committed this
and
heinous crime.
He'd use terminology like, if I had have committed this crime, or if I was going to commit this crime, this is how I would have done it. So he'd describe it in great detail you would have had to have experienced to be able to process.
There's
but
a
without
disconnect there between the person saying it and the person who's done it.
Exactly. So over the years, he would continue to divulge information that would lead to new searches, finding successful results, finally allowing some families to find closure. His vicious crimes were all documented in his head, and his lust for passion driving every moment, and his need for control solidifying all of the above. The information divulged being that of which we have already discussed throughout. So in 1984, Bundy contacted Robert Keppel, one of the detectives responsible for collating all of the data, and offered to share his self-proclaimed expertise in serial killer psychology in the ongoing hunt in Washington for the Green River Killer, later identified as Gary Ridgway, who we will cover in another episode. In early 1986, an execution date of March the 4th was set on the Chi Omega convictions. However, the Supreme Court issued a brief stay requiring the execution to be rescheduled. In April, shortly after the new date, which was July the 2nd, had been announced, Bundy finally confessed in great detail to Hagmeyer and Nelson what they believed was the full range of his depravity, including details of what he did to some of the victims after their deaths. This was a common piece of his ritual, including necrophilia. Bundy also told of how he revisited Taylor Mountain, Issaquah, and other secondary crime scenes to partake in sexual activities with his victims up until putrefaction forced him to stop.
That's shockingly disgusting. What is wrong with this person?
Yeah, we're seeing the true state of mind of Ted Bundy at this point.
I guess, do you think because he knows there is no way out, he then just lets it all go? He tells them everything.
I think it was also because you could see he was very happy while telling them, because officers were so desperate to find out what he had done and where he had left the body so that victims could find closure, families could find closure, that I think he revelled in the fact that once again he was in control. They were kind of dancing to his tune. If he was going to confess, they were going to do what he wanted to do.
It's just terrible.
And on execution day, less than 15 hours before the scheduled July 2 extension, the 11th Circuit Court of Appeals stayed it indefinitely and remanded the Chi Omega case for review on multiple technicalities, including Bundy's mental competence to stand trial and an erroneous instruction by the trial judge during the penalty phase, requiring the jury to break a 6-6 tie between life imprisonment and the death penalty. So going back to when we said it took 8 hours, that's why, because some people felt like life imprisonment was enough and others were pushing for the death penalty. There was never a question on whether or not he was guilty.
Right.
It was just, what is his punishment going to be? So another death sentence date was created for November the 18th, 1986, which was also held due to ongoing struggles in the judicial system. So, as a result of the ongoing battles, a final execution date was announced for the 24th of January, 1989 at 7:16 a.m. Hundreds of attendees sang, danced, and set off fireworks to celebrate the occasion. Roars and cheering were also witnessed as Bundy's body was transported out of the prison in a white hearse. Bundy was subsequently cremated in Gainesville, and his ashes were scattered at an undisclosed location in the Cascade Range of Washington state in respect to his last will and testament. In total, there were 20 identified victims that suffered at the hands of Bundy, although along with this there were 5 identified survivors. The list that Bundy confessed to Hagmaier consisted of 30 homicides. However, some of the murders did not include names and to this day still remain unidentified. This resulted in 10 unidentified victims, according to Bundy's confessions recorded on tape. However, it is believed through research that the number is actually a lot higher, leaving the sinister idea that Bundy took some of his victims to the grave with him. Cold, evil, and calculated right to the very end.
The one thing he could have done is say everything and give the families, like you said, a chance to reconcile.
Exactly, but that would have been him once again relinquishing power, and if he couldn't even take a plea bargain to not receive a death sentence, then he's definitely not going to do it in this instance, I don't think. And as such, that brings us to the end of episode 2 and our research on Bundy. These 2 episodes have been condensed down greatly. The information surrounding the case spans far and wide, and as we've said before, it truly is a shocking case that will continue to shake the fibres of our very being and our human nature, which we believe to be good. And one can only thank the individuals, specialists and detectives responsible for ensuring he was not able to continue.
I agree. What an awful, awful and atrocious human being.
Yep.
Well, I'm kind of glad we got to the end of that.
Yeah, it was 2 long episodes, but as I said, there was so much data to get through that it needed to be taken into 2 episodes, otherwise key factors and key important parts of the case would have been missed.
Well, that wraps everything up for Ted Bundy then. Thank you very much for giving us that information over the last 2 episodes. It's been pretty heartbreaking, shocking, but, well done. So, what have we got coming up next episode?
So for the next episode, we're going to be looking at Ed Kemper, or Big Ed. Now, Ed Kemper's been in the spotlight recently through the TV show Mindhunter, and what we'll be doing is once again going through his life and what made him so infamous for the wrong reasons.
I've got to admit, I love Mindhunter.
It's incredible, and it looks like season 3 is coming back, so that's amazing. But it really gives you an insight into how the FBI first started to psychologically profile killers and the techniques that they use to understand why somebody does what they do. How can you start to build a pattern, and how can you start to process potentially what they're going to do next?
Well, thank you so much, everyone, for listening to this podcast. We hope to see you in the next podcast.
Yeah, absolutely. And if you do have any queries or you'd like to suggest something, then please do email us at uncoveringhistorypodcast@gmail.com. And don't forget, we launched our website recently at www.uncoveringhistory.co.uk.
And don't forget to hit us up on Instagram. You can find us at Uncovering History Podcast. Thank you for listening, and we will hopefully see you again next episode.
Yep, see you soon.
Bye.